Deathwatch, Chapter 8. The sun was the most fearsome thing Ben had ever seen. He could not believe that it could be so high in the absolutely cloudless sky, could not believe that it had taken him so long to get up that chimney of stone. He looked down at himself, and it made him sick. His feet were just bloody lumps of torn flesh, half covered with the dirty, bloody shreds of cloth. Where the rock had abraded him, the blood stood like a watery red dew. And in this juice of his blood, the sun, looking small and mean, was frying him. It was at least 11 o'clock in the morning, and as he pushed himself up, he knew that he could not survive much longer. The itching had started all over his body. He resented most the fact that the itch was the most intolerable where his flesh had already been torn away. He was very sick and weak and saw now where he had vomited small shreds of food and a thick, drying slime. He could also see that his hands and feet were jerking and shaking as though being moved by something invisible to him. Forcing his eyes to stay open and to focus instead of rolling helplessly and dizzily in their dry sockets, Ben saw that he was sitting at one end of a wide, upward-sloping ledge of stone. Above him, the face of the butte went straight up, apparently to the top, some hundreds of feet above. The surface of the rock was as smooth as a tombstone. Looking along the ledge, he saw that it ended abruptly, not fading back into the mass of the butte, but cut off sharply. Other than a ledge and a cliff face, there was nothing. No depression in the stone, no fissures forming shallow baskets. There was nothing in sight that could interest even the birds. And there was no shade. There would be shade late in the afternoon, but by then, it would be too late to do him any good. It required a great effort for him to get up on his feet, and when he took a step out along the ledge, the pain almost drove him back to his knees. Doing what he could to support himself with his hands on the cliff face, Ben hobbled along the edge until he came to the end of it. It was like a knife in the back. It was a meanness. He had been cheated. He had been robbed. The ledge ended as though it had been cut off by an enormous bandsaw. The edge of it perfectly straight. And from the edge, it dropped straight down, all the way, right to the breccia. There was not a break or a flaw in the straight wall. Something, the cold of glacial ages, or the violence of earthquakes, or the temperature of a certain upflow of magma, had formed in the stone of the butte a shape almost like a funnel standing on end, which had been cut in half from top to bottom. The ledge intercepted this high stone funnel about halfway up the cup of it. High above him, Ben could see the rim of the funnel, very wide there, perhaps 100 feet across. Below him, the spout was a chimney, such as the end he had climbed, but instead of being V'd, this one was round, a cylinder cut in half. From where he stood, it was at least 50 feet across, open space to the other side of the bisected funnel. Farther than that if you measured across the curved stone face of the funnel itself. On the other side, he could not make out exactly what the formation was. for a thin wall of basalt, a slab which had not broken off, stood straight up at the outer edge of the butte, apparently unconnected to the mass except at the base. This thin wall and the solid wall of the butte formed a narrow corridor which lay in deep shade, the slab wall between it and the sun. It didn't really matter what was in that dark corridor, for he could not get over there. He could, in fact, go nowhere. He was too close to death now to make it back down that long V'd chimney, and even if he had been in his best physical condition, there was no way, without ropes and pittons and hammers, spiked boots and heavy gloves, to climb the sheer face of the butte. And without someone on the other side to anchor a rope bridge for him, there was no way across that carved bank of stone which formed the cup of the funnel. Ben was standing there helplessly staring at the stone wall when something struck his arm, forcing it back against the rock, and then the sound of the shot cracked the silence. With the sound still echoing, Ben shuffled back into protection of the slab and stood plastered against it. Moving his arm only a little, he stared in amazement at the small purplish hole in it halfway between his wrist and his elbow. Slowly turning his arm over, he saw the other hole, this one more ragged, and with a little stream of bright blood flowing out of it and down into the palm of his hand. There was no pain at all. Ben put his thumb on the hole, his forefinger on the other, and pressed gently. Now there was pain, but nothing compared to the aching of his mouth, or the burning of his eyes, or the sun on his raw flesh. He moved his arm slowly from the elbow, raising and lowering it, and then turning it from side to side. These movements caused no more and no less pain in the wounds. He drew his hand into a fist, watching his fingers moving easily and normally. He had been shot, but it did not hurt him, and it had not damaged him. Even the blood had stopped flowing. Ben had not thought about Maddox for a long time. Now he did. Maddox was shooting now to kill him. And Ben's body, falling from this high cliff, smashing down against the ledges and finally into the breccia, would be so mangled and broken that no one would suspect that he was dead before he fell. Faintly, as though from another world, he heard the Jeep engine start. Maddox was trying to find a position where he could see Ben again. It would not, Ben realized, be hard to do. Somehow, the sound of the Jeep set his mind adrift, and he was suddenly thinking of a thing called a velodrome that he had seen at a country fair when he was a boy. A girl with a long red scarf trailing in the wind had ridden a motorcycle up from the bottom of the wooden pit, going round and around until she left the sloping wooden sides, and the motorcycle was traveling on the perfectly vertical wall of the thing. He had stared at this, not believing it could be done, but she was doing it, the red scarf trailing straight behind her, as she lay flat out in space. In a few minutes, Maddox would have maneuvered the Jeep into position to shoot him again. Ben knew that he had only until the Jeep motor stopped. Reaching behind him, he pulled the bundle of soda leaves and the slingshot around to his stomach. He lashed them all into one compact bundle and then worked the whole thing around to his back again, tying it against his backbone. Lifting one foot and then the other, he ripped the shreds of his shorts from his feet. Ready, he stood a second longer, looking out across the ledge at the hot, smooth, slanting face of the funnel. Far below him, the Jeep appeared and braked to a stop, the dust settling around it. Maddox got out, moving in the dust. Ben had an odd, clear thought. I don't want to die here. Not here on this barren piece of stone. He came out on the ledge. He came out fast, pushing himself out with his hands against the wall, and as he ran, he tried to block off the pain which pounded up from his feet. Whether Maddox shot at him or not, he would never know, for he seemed to have come into a bright, hot, tiny world filled with sunshine, stone, and silence. He did not hear his own breathing, or the thundering of his feet, or the increasingly hard beat of his heart. He did not feel anything, not the wind of his movements, or the heat of the sun, or the gentle rubbing of the bundle against his ragged back. All he felt was the soles of his feet, his whole attention moving down to those two areas of flesh and concentrating there. He was straight off the end of the ledge, straight out into the sloping stone funnel. Now the areas of his feet touching the hot stone changed. He was no longer running flat-footed. The left outer sole of his left foot and the inner sole of his right were all that touched. Every sense of feel he had, he concentrated there in his feet, feeling every tiny roughness, his skin seeming to grasp it and let it go, feeling every smooth area, his skin sucking itself against it. His toes felt as sensitive as fingers, touching, gripping, pushing, letting go. As he ran, his left hand brushed the wall at his side with a delicate, gentle caress, not grasping, not pushing, not holding, his fingertips just flitting along the stone. He held his right arm out, only slightly bent, his fingers open and spread as though to find assistance in the air itself. Focusing his mind on the touch of his feet against the stone, he drove power down into them when he felt that he had some tiny grasp. Did not force it when he felt that there was no grip, only smooth, steep stone. He ran and ran, touching, flying, fingering, balancing, floating, as the curved wall of the funnel seemed to spin beside him. He was trending down. He had planned to make this passage straight across the funnel from the wide ledge to the dark corridor on the other side, it too ending with a sharp edge at the face of the funnel. But he was going slowly down the steep slope, each step a fraction lower than the last. When he had left the ledge, he could not look across empty space and see into the dark corridor, see the small stones lying on its floor, see the walls where they touched it. Then he could not see the floor any longer, for the opening was moving slowly, slowly upward. If, when he reached the narrow opening of the corridor, he could not get into it, all he could do was to run on to the edge of the funnel and then into space, for there was nothing else. The corridor was a black rectangle in the reddish-brown wall on which he ran. It was coming closer and rising higher. Ben flung his arms up, his fingers curled and reaching. They found the sharp edge and locked themselves to it. Everything stopped. The moment, the feel, the air, the light touching of his feet, as he hung his body flat against the steep wall, his arms stretched to their limits, his fingers curled over the edge of the corridor's floor. The stone against him felt strange. It was as though in all the time he had been running, he had not been in contact with the earth. The fleeting touches of his fingers and the small areas, the soles of his feet, not really touching the stone. This stone was solid and warm and felt soft, as though he were lying on a warm, stiff-fibered carpet. It was a sleepy, delicious feeling, and there was no reason to end it. Just hang here on this warm carpet and sleep. The fingers of his right hand had slipped steadily, nerve by nerve, but he had not noticed it. Only the snapping movement of his little finger as it slid off the edge brought his attention to his hands and made him feel the growing strain coming down his arms in the tight strings of pain. He worked his body upward and at last rolled over into the darkness of the narrow corridor. His muscles trembled, jerked, shivered as he crawled on his hands and knees into what was not a corridor, but a tunnel, the outer wall solidly curving over at the top and becoming a part of the butte itself. Sometime, 1,000,000 years ago, when the desert was a sea, waves had formed this tunnel, wearing the sides and floor smooth, rounding the sharp edges of the stone. Ben crawled onto where light showed a slight bend in the tunnel. The floor here began to slope downward and was smooth, the stone almost gleaming in the subdued light coming from the far end. He got around the bend slowly, and there lay the lake, a great lake of dark, sparkling, clear water, held there by the stone.